All right. So, some of you have wondered, wondering stuff about, my sense of humor, comedy, all sorts of different stuff, right? Some of you think my opinions actually have validation, you might call it. Others think it's just funny. And the truth of it is that I actually enjoy humor. I like to laugh. I really do. It's something that it's like they say laughter is the best medicine. In fact, I actually at one point talked about laughter therapy, as a joke. And then the crazy part is apparently it's now a real kind of something that different ones go to laughter therapy to laugh because it actually is somewhat cleansing. So when you realize that, the idea that it's like, is it good to laugh? Yeah, sometimes. But you don't always have to laugh. Sometimes there's serious stuff that you have to think about, right? But if you can actually, for a moment, just kind of have those times where you're like, you know what? Yeah, it's kind of funny for whatever reason. That's why I talked about some of the stuff that happened when I was in jail, some of the stuff I watch on TV. And yet, I also want you to think at the same time. So while some of it's kind of funny, it's also like, do you ever think about some of it beyond just the fact that it's like, yeah, that was funny. You know what I mean? Because it's something where, if you start to realize, like, when I was talking about in jail, there you are in your cell, you got depending on where you're at. Like, if you're in a hole, right, then it's solitary confinement. You don't have anyone else in the cell with you. You're there alone. You walk out of your cell for an hour. The rest of the time, 23 out of 24 hours a day, you're in your cell. Now, for others, when they're walking around, they get to visit with other ones and play some games and stuff like that, So, every once in a while, even getting to go to, like, some recreational kind of spot for something. And so it's just interesting when you start, realizing some of that for what it is, okay? So, with that being said, they have what's called commissary, where you can actually purchase certain items if you have money on your books. Now, if you have money, if someone's, helps you get money, or even if you can, get it there yourself or something like that, where you have a certain amount you can spend on various items, there's all sorts of stuff you can get, right? So paper, pencils, envelopes, food, all sorts of stuff like that, right? Shampoo, cleaning products, kind of sort of, right, for yourself. And if you don't have money, then you get what's called the indigent items, which in some places you don't have to pay for, and in other places they expect you to pay for it. So it's kind of funny how that works. Because when I was here in Kansas, they expect you to pay for it, which is kind of funny because they actually have a deal where it's like you owe us for your shampoo and soap and stuff. And I guess there's some that owe like hundreds and thousands and whatever dollars because of the fact that they don't actually purchase their own stuff. But it isn't like they actually seem to go after anybody for the fact that they owe all that money. It's kind of funny. It's just if you put money on your books, any money you put on your books has to pay off whatever that is first before you can actually purchase any other items. So me, I actually personally purchased a bunch of stuff myself, right? And that's how I knew some of the items that they actually had available, right? So when you realize some of the items they had, including with some of the different foods, with some soups and some of the different, juices and stuff like that, right? That you can actually use some of that for art and stuff too, right? Now what's funny is some of the stuff that happens because of that. Like you gotta wonder what the different ones are thinking. For example, if I have a juice and I have enough to get some food, but I don't have enough to get like a spoon or something, and let's say I just decide that I'm like, I'm just going to stir it with my finger, right? So let's say that I was like, let's see, I'll get some fruit punch, make some juice, stir it with my finger a little bit, and then there's a knock at the door. It's like, hey, well, we got to go to court or whatever, and stuff. It's like, oh, yeah, hey, just a second. And then I got red dripping down my hands. Where'd that blood come from? It isn't blood. Did you try and hurt yourself? No. Actually, I didn't. Is there someone else in there? Do we need to go? No, it's just juice. Look, it's juice. I, it isn't a bloodbath. I know you're a little paranoid because it's jail and you're a guard, so that's probably why you're paranoid. Looking at somebody that's got, some red dripping from their hand. But it's just some juice, so it's okay. Don't worry about it. You're safe. You know? You know what I mean? It's like, what is it when guards are like the ones that are getting like, trippy about different stuff? Is they give you toilet paper, right? When you go to jail. And what's funny is you can actually, use some water with the toilet paper and stuff and create certain stuff. I even made some dice and other stuff like that. And what was funny is I was joking with some different ones, going like, "You do realize all this stuff here that it like can all be used as weapons?" And they're like, "It can't be used as weapons." I'm like, "You might be surprised." And like, "Oh yeah, do you think you could kill someone with toilet paper?" Yeah, actually. I mean, I personally wasn't planning on doing something like that, but the honest truth is, yeah. I'm just being honest. Don't I don't want to scare you. Okay? So just calm down. It's all right. Just calm. All right? Once you calm down, I want you to realize that if I was a really bad guy, yes, I could kill you with toilet paper. Now they want to laugh about it, right? They're like, kill with toilet paper. So I made toilet paper weapons. And they stopped laughing when they realized that they actually worked. And they're like, "How did you do that?" That's a good question. It's a really good question. And be glad I didn't make the lethal version of it. I just wanted to prove to you that yes, I can make weapons and yes, they can work as an actual weapon. If I made the lethal versions, pouring water on it wouldn't, it's like, even if I stabbed you or something like that, you do realize because it's toilet paper, it would just kind of sort of disintegrate, right? Once it gets wet. That's the problem with toilet. If I was really trying to kill you, I would have made the lethal versions. I just wanted to prove to you proof of concept. And that yes, I could kill you with toilet paper, making all sorts of different weapons. And once they realized that I wasn't actually trying to kill them, they allowed me to have the toilet paper back. They just didn't want me making any more weapons. And I was totally cool with that because I was like, look, I ain't really a bad guy. I just wanted to prove to you that don't just laugh something off because of whatever reason it is, So, so when you realize it's kind of sort of funny because when criminals are there and stuff, and they're like, "What are you doing?" I'm making some stuff with toilet paper, and the criminals are scared. They're like, "Oh, guard, he's making weapons." Why are you scared? Aren't you the hardened criminals? But so when the criminals are calling the guards because they're scared because I'm making toilet paper weapons, is kind of funny. And when the guards themselves are kind of like, all right, just relax, chill. Are you worried? What are you worried about? If I was gonna kill you, you would have had no idea that I had. None of them would have had any idea. I just want you to realize that you're safe. Don't worry about it. It's cool. I want to de-escalate the situation here. Hopefully, if I can talk to you for a minute, okay? Just calm down, all right? Don't go trying to grab any weapons. Don't try and grab your pepper spray and your tasers and stuff. Don't. I want to make sure you don't hurt yourself and you don't hurt anybody else. All right? I mean, I know you're guards and all that, but I just want to make sure for a moment that you think about what you're doing. You know what I mean? So it's kind of funny. So when you start thinking about that, right, that in itself, then it's stuff where when there's different girls that have different kinds of needs and stuff that they can't seem to get a decent dildo or vibrator for themselves and stuff. Although some of them apparently can get the guards whenever they want, which is part of why I did what I did with some of the female guards, because I was like, honestly, I think it should be equal opportunity, don't you? You know what I mean? Like if those dudes can get those girls, well, because of their, then I think it's fair that you should get to enjoy some little bit of something yourself, don't you? I mean, it's only fair, right? It is America. Why should the dudes get all the fun, right? So it's just so it's just something where it's like when some of the girls were talking about stuff, I'm like, you do realize they have a pickle, right? It's like that big of a pickle. It's like a decent sized pickle, right? I want you to realize how big of a pickle it is that they have, and it's a hot pickle. So I'm like, you might want to possibly wrap it with something else, or something, or wash it so that you don't hurt yourself and burn yourself from the pepper that's on it and stuff. But basically, that is a way that you can actually use some food to pleasure yourself, and then when you're all done with that, are you gonna eat that? Because if you ain't gonna eat it, I'll eat it. I don't know what you're gonna do with the pickle, but apparently since you're all like, I'll go ahead and eat the, something really good. Anyways, some of y'all are like, oh yeah. Some of you are like, what is he talking about? And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, you're probably a virgin. So, the best part about all the different stuff when you start thinking about it is, it isn't like stuff just with jail, right? Because some of this different stuff, if you think about politics, all right, they talk about stuff with border crossings and, oh my goodness, look out for the Mexicans. In the meantime, Canadians have been crossing the northern border for years. Look at TV, watch TV for a while. How many shows have Canadian actors and actresses? How much of the music we listen to is actually from the UK, including Canada? Did you realize that Canada is part of the UK, and that the UK includes parts of Africa, it includes, Australia, Canada, Britain, England, right? So do you realize what all is incorporated as part of the UK? I'm just saying, and I ain't saying nothing bad about them. I'm just going, you talk about Mexicans like, they took our jobs. Really? So did Canadians. I'm just saying. I mean, and some of the high-paying jobs, too. Did you notice that? I don't know how many of you noticed, but there's a bunch of, what would you call it? Canadians, Australians, Europeans, they apparently have some really good paying jobs. And I don't hear a bunch of complaint about that. Probably because they're white. But if they were Mexicans, apparently you gotta send them back home. Get back to your country because you're a Mexican. And so it's just kind of funny if you think about it. Now I'm half Mexican, all right? So you got to realize that. So it's just something where you think I don't know about prejudice. I've dealt with prejudice most of my life, and the funny part about it is when you realize that the prejudice I've dealt with has nothing to do with my race sometimes. Did you know that, believe it or not, some have actually thought I was black? And because they thought I was black, for one reason or another, like I was playing video games years ago online, and I was talking to, and they thought I was black. Like I kept going, look, I'm half white, half Mexican, I'm an American citizen, but it's like, my genetic background is, like a Heinz 57 of whiteness and then Mexican. So when you realize that, It's something where the reality of it is, when I went to talk to certain ones, they were expecting a black man and they didn't realize it was me. Even if I'm talking with the same voice and the same kind of mannerisms, and they're like, so, what, he sent you instead? What are you talking about? Dude, we were talking to Tim the other. I'm Tim. Yeah, sure, whatever. You know, where's he at? Well, you don't actually recognize me. When we were playing those games and stuff like that. And I guess some of it is, when I'm playing video games sometimes, I guess I talk a little more street. I start sounding like I'm an actual killer or something like that sometimes. Just like, you dead now, bitch, motherfucker. What do you think you're doing? Oh yeah, you thought you were gonna get me? You can't get me, bitch. You know, and stuff. And then they're like, the dude is black. No, I'm sorry to disappoint you. Apparently, it's a disappointment that I'm half white and half Mexican. I don't know why that is. I don't know what to say about it. You know, but you seem really disappointed because I guess you had a certain picture in your mind of who I was and what I looked like, you know. And when I was a kid, what's funny too is when you realize that when I was in school, there were those that thought I was Asian. And the funniest part about it was there were two Asian kids at school that actually looked Asian. All right? They looked Asian, their heritage was Asian, and they still made fun of me, calling me Chinaman. And I'm like, I'm half Mexican and half white, and you're calling me Chinaman. And when the Asians were doing it too, I'm like, this just seems a little ridiculous. You know, you're making fun of me for a nationality that I don't have any kind of genetic, whatever you call it, to ties or whatever, and you're walking over to me going, ching, 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 and I'm going, but it doesn't really mean anything to me, because I'm actually half white and half Mexican. So when you realize I have, and then, like I said, when you realize, like with the border and stuff like that, we're like, oh, you know, those Mexicans, lazy bums, all they want to do is bring over drugs, rape our women, and take our jobs, you know? And I'm like, so basically what you're telling me is I have to deal with the racism from just about every freaking race for apparently no reason at all. And that's what my life was like for years. So when I'm talking to different ones, and sometimes they're like, you don't know what it's like for us. We have to deal with racism on a daily basis. And I'm like, you have no freaking clue the type of life I've had to deal with because of different ones who thought I was a different race. Or even the race that I actually, you know, have half of my nationality, if you want to call it that, as far as genetically. They want to claim that, like, we're just evil for some reason. And you think I have no idea what it's like to be targeted with racism? You know what I mean? Like, if you really start to think about it. And so it's just somewhere, you know, I listen to different ones and I can comprehend somewhere it is that they're coming from sometimes, right? Because of the fact that it's like, yeah, well, you know, I don't know if you realize it, but I've had to deal with some of that kind of issues myself for whatever reason, right? And then beyond that, you also got to realize that, you know, I listen to what different ones are saying, and for some reason, I actually think about it. And that's, I think, is part of the problem. It's like, oh my God, someone's thinking, target, where is that person? We got to find and destroy the thinker. You know, he might start giving others ideas, you know. You know, I call it like the Frankenstein's monster syndrome, okay? Because it's almost like they don't realize the difference between a good fire and a bad fire. It's the way I call them retards, okay? I ain't making fun of the disabled because I'm disabled. I have a mental health disability that causes me to, you know, every once in a while, it isn't like every day, but when I get manic, which means I'm very creative, I'm very energetic, suddenly, every once in a while, I'll start seeing and hearing stuff that isn't real. Alright? So I have a mental health disability. And I have family that has disabilities. So I don't make fun of those that are disabled. If you're disabled, it doesn't mean you're a retard. A retard is someone that's like a fire retardant, okay? That stops progress of something. Now, the problem with actual retards is most of them think they're normal. They're like, oh, I'm healthy and I have a good brain and I don't need to worry about stuff, until you start actually listening to what they're saying and you realize they're retarded. They're retards. And the reason is because they have the Frankenstein's monster syndrome. Alright? Now, the Frankenstein's monster syndrome basically is something where what happens is that, there's something that for some reason causes them to have that feeling of fire bad, of whatever kind of something you're talking about. Whatever subject you can think of, it's all bad. In fact, racism is a form of it, all right? Because when you realize it's like, any other race is bad, all race is bad except ours, all bad, and stuff. And the problem with it is, it's something where it's like they don't realize that there is the difference between like the bad fire, like a forest fire that's going towards a bunch of homes and could destroy a bunch of homes and possibly kill different ones, right? And lighting a fire on a stove, like a gas stove, which you can actually use to cook with. Or a fire that's used to heat a boiler, right? Or a campfire so that you can keep warm while you're camping. But to them, it's all the same. It's all fire bad, fire bad. And it's the Frankenstein's monster syndrome. They can't differentiate. It should be easy to differentiate, right? That sometimes there's a fire that's bad, that can be harmful and hurt different ones. It's something where it's like, if someone, for example, thinking of it in terms of racism of sorts, right? And what's happening with the Mexican border and stuff. It's like, oh, Mexicans are bad. We can't, send them back. And that is the Frankenstein's monster syndrome. They don't differentiate, right? And it's like they're all the same kind of deal, all right? Now, what's interesting about it is the fact that, is it something that you can really say that all Mexicans are murderers and rapists and that they're all a bunch of drug dealers? No. The reality is it isn't true. In fact, there's various Mexicans that have actually contributed to life in America. So to say that they're all bad is Frankenstein's monster syndrome. Alright? It's racism. And when you start to realize the difference between someone who can actually think logically and reasonably and balance it out and knows the difference between good fire and bad fire, that even certain relationships, it's like, this is what's interesting. If you saw some dude with a young girl that was there and she was going, "Aah!" and stuff, what's your first reaction? Now, what's interesting is, what if it was something where it's like, because some are like, oh, some man is toward it. And then it's like, well, what if it was just a dad going, look, you can't go spend the night at your friend's house today. We got stuff we got to do. If you want to have your friend over next week, or if you want to go there next week, you can. It's just you can't do it today. Now, maybe you don't hear what the dad's saying because from the distance you're at, all you can do is hear the kid screaming and whatever like that, but doesn't mean that's a bad man. And if you're assuming that it's a bad man just because she's screaming, then you probably have Frankenstein's monster syndrome. And you don't have all the facts to tell you it's just a father trying to act like a parent. Does that mean that you think that every time a girl screams that she isn't in danger? No, because that's also Frankenstein's monster syndrome. Because maybe you blind yourself to all of it. So that it's like, somewhere it's the same kind of concept, just a little bit reversed, right? But if every time you hear someone scream, you just assume, well, you know what, it doesn't really matter. I'm sure it's just a parent with their kid. Oh, that's how bad stuff happens to kids sometimes, right? It's learning to differentiate, looking at various situations for what it is. When you learn to differentiate between good fire and bad fire, between someone that's actually harmful and someone that's trying to help, between someone that, could harm someone and someone that actually cares about someone. See, when you start learning some of those differences, when you realize that, a situation can look very similar, but sometimes it's the little differences that make all the difference in the world. Now, the difficulty with Frankenstein's monster syndrome is sometimes it leads to something else that I like to call the Prince Humperdinck syndrome. Now, the Prince Humperdinck syndrome, if you ever watched The Princess Bride, is when when someone gets to a point where they're so much about fire bad that they have a certain attitude where they feel they have to destroy others' lives when it isn't necessary. See, if you watch The Princess Bride, there's a certain point where he's like, you two could have been happy. You could have enjoyed the rest of your lives together. Not one couple in a million has that chance. Why? Why do you feel that way? Because the two main characters, Wesley and Buttercup, actually loved each other. You truly love each other. Yeah. And? Well, I think no one should suffer like you. And that is the Prince Humperdinck syndrome. When you realize they get to such a point of demented, delusion about stuff that it's almost like any kind of something that they view as bad, even if it isn't, right? Because could you really say that if someone loves someone else that it's bad? And yet for Prince Humperdinck it was. And why do you think it was bad for Prince Humperdinck? Why do you think he felt like, well, if you truly love each other, I think no one should suffer like you? And that there are those that's the way they view it. That's how they view others. And I call them haters, and so do others. You call them haters, don't you? Haters and trolls, right? And when you realize that those haters and trolls usually have a combination of the Frankenstein's monster syndrome and the Prince Humperdinck syndrome. And that's why they want to hate. That's why they want to make it seem bad and sound bad, and why they want to discourage you, and why they have nothing but messages of torment and hatred towards you. And then you have to realize it's because they don't have any actual worth, no real value. Because if they did, guess what they wouldn't have to do? They do the stuff they do to make themselves feel better about themselves. But it leaves them empty somewhat because of the fact that the truth of it is that the more they hurt others, it doesn't really give them the satisfaction they actually need. And what they really need, if you try and tell them what they need and what could actually help, they'll deny it. They don't want any part of it. Why? Because then they might have to admit that their thinking is off. But they can't admit that. Like, I can actually admit that I have a mental health disability, right? I don't have a problem talking about it. And the reason I don't have a problem talking about my mental health is because of the fact that I've studied it for years. I accept the fact I have a mental health disability, and I've actually worked for years to get to a point where I can sometimes seem somewhat normal. Am I always normal? Or what some would consider normal, right? I guess normal sometimes is a matter of opinion, right? What some consider normal, someone else might think is totally ludicrous. So it kind of depends on a person's opinion of what they consider normal. But I try and present myself as normal as possible, right? Does it mean it always works? No. Why? Because I have a mental health disability. And I can at least admit that, though. It isn't like I try and hide from the fact that I have mental health disability as if I have no reason why it is that sometimes I seem a little bit off or something, And so because of that, that puts me in a different category than certain ones that can't admit that they have a real mental health problem. See, once you realize you have a mental health problem, and once you can address it and accept it, then you can actually work towards various goals regarding whatever it is that you have difficulties with, right? And for some it's more difficult than others. And some mental health, disabilities and stuff, it's something where it's like, that there is certain points where medicine hasn't gotten to the point to actually help certain ones yet. And sometimes you don't necessarily even need medicine. Sometimes you just need someone who can actually, help you and can listen to you and cares about you. And you don't always need medication, but some need medication for different reasons. So I ain't going to say you should never have medication. What I say is you need to really think about what it is that you have as your mental health disability. Figure out what it is that you can do so that you actually can live a comfortable life for yourself without harming anybody else. And if you ain't really harming anyone, it doesn't matter what anyone else says. If you have a comfortability with your life and you feel good and you aren't hurting anyone, it doesn't matter what anyone else says, the reality. And that's just the truth of it. They'll try and tell you what you need, but they're trying to tell you what you need instead of asking you, hey, what do you need? Which could actually be helpful. Wouldn't that be something? Can you imagine going to, Doc, I don't know, I'm having mental health problems, I don't know what to do. What do you think you need? I don't know, I didn't really think about it. Well, how about we sit down and why don't you tell me about your problems and then you can tell me, what is it that you've tried? Tell me what it is that you think that you need. What is it that you actually want? Do you feel like you have anyone there supporting you? Would you like support? Do you feel like, you have those that are there that can actually, help you with somewhat the different kinds of stuff for your mental health, so that you can have the type of environment that you need. And what's interesting about it is, if you realize that some actually, have a certain kind of feeling about it for one reason or another, right? And so when I'm looking at some of the different, situations, right? The reality of it, as to what it is that happens sometimes, right? The fact that it's like, okay, I'm nearsighted, right? I'm nearsighted, and some think that it means I'm blind. It doesn't. There's certain stuff that happens sometimes that because I notice stuff, they assume that, like, either one, I'm lying, and they think, well, he isn't really nearsighted, otherwise he wouldn't notice certain stuff. Look, just because I'm nearsighted doesn't mean I don't notice certain differences. If you assume that, it has to do something with, vision as far as like, oh, he can see just fine, he did. Really? That sometimes I wear contacts and glasses, right? I don't always wear contacts and glasses because of the fact that, I've had situations where I didn't have access to contacts and glasses. And I had to learn to look at stuff with just my normal eyes. So even though it's blurry, it doesn't mean I don't notice certain differences. What's crazy is when you realize that sometimes, if you ever watch, if you ever watch Ariana Grande, would you? Because she didn't have her glasses, right? Well, believe it or not, if you squint enough and stuff, sometimes you can actually read stuff and actually figure out what it is. It's kind of odd. You do realize that part of the squinting is basically what your retinas and stuff do anyways, right? Your pupils, when they dilate and all that, letting light in and stuff, that they actually do surgeries to eyes to do what it is when you're going like that. And it has a similar effect, except for you don't have to squint anymore because the surgery actually does what it is that you do when you go like that, to try and figure out what it is. So it's just interesting, like I said, when you start realizing that there's certain perceptions, including with mental health, that certain ones have, right? And nobody wants to talk about mental health. Oh my God, you got mental health, you're crazy. They're crazy, But that also leads certain ones to have their own mental health conditions. Because when you realize it's their perception of mental health that causes them to have paranoia, it's their perception of mental health that causes them to do some really crazy shit sometimes. It's their perception of mental health that sometimes gives them the Frankenstein's monster syndrome, and worse yet, gives them sometimes Now, see, if I don't even have to say it, if I don't have to finish that sentence and you're already thinking what? What is it that you're thinking? When I was started saying that, what was it that thought? What was that thought that you had in your mind? And what was that? What was it that happened where as I was talking to you, I started talking, and then when I didn't finish a sentence or a thought, that you yourself actually finished that thought, didn't you? And what was it you were thinking? Now, I ain't saying you all have the exact same thought. There's some of you that probably have some different kind of thought, right? But at the same time, what made that thought, whatever it is, whether it's one that a bunch of different ones were probably thinking, or something completely different, whatever it was, that at that moment, whatever you were thinking, what was it that actually caused that thought? And then once you start thinking about that, maybe you can start to, figure out some of the different, ideas about, do you have any friends with mental health disabilities? Do you really want to help them? What do you think you might possibly do to help them? Because if you were thinking about stuff, and if right now you're just kind of like, oh my God, because maybe you have that little epiphany, that moment where you're just like, bing, oh my God, I had a thought. I just guess what I realized, Hopefully you don't have like sparks flying out of your ears and smoke because you're like, it's like, sorry if I made you think for the first time ever. Sometimes maybe it hurts a little bit, but if you continue doing it, eventually, like a muscle, it'll get stronger and you can think without hurting yourself. All right, so just think about that for a minute. So when it gets to a certain point when you realize if you really want to help someone who has mental health disabilities, sometimes the best idea is to approach with kindness, asking questions. Don't assume and don't believe whatever it was you heard, even if it's true. And what you have to realize what that means is, even if what you heard is true, don't think about certain stuff relating to the person you're talking to. Think about them and let them help you realize if it's true for them or if it's something that is true of possibly a majority, but it doesn't necessarily apply to the person you're talking to. Once you start realizing you can look at different ones individually, like basically what you do is, if you think about it in terms of like putting them in different groups, okay? Once they're in a group, you don't just say, something like, well, they play sports, they're a jock, right? Because that's like, something where it's basically what you're saying is, well, if you're a football player, then basically you can play any point in the field. We'll just put you there and you can play that position no matter what. So even though you're a quarterback, we're going to make you a receiver. Even though you're a receiver, we're going to make you a blocker. And, even though you're a blocker, we're going to put you as the quarterback. And what kind of a team do you think that would actually make if you started making changes like that? Especially if different ones have been working on the skills for where their position is for years, and that's what they were really good at. And if you move them from one position to another, and they're football players, though. They play football. Does it mean that you're making the best team possible? Or is it that you're just arrogantly presuming that just because they're a football player that they automatically can do whatever it is that other players in different positions can do? And once you realize the reality of that, that's when you can actually start looking at the groups and look at each of them as an individual. And once you realize that each one, even though they're part of a group, kind of like a team, right? That you can go, well, that person's a quarterback, that person's a receiver, that person's a blocker, that person's a center, right? Once you start realizing all the different stuff, right? And once you start realizing each person individually within a group, guess what that can allow for? And you realize that a lot of it has to do with perception. And you want to make sure you don't have that mentality, the Frankenstein's monster syndrome, because that is part of the reason why different ones are put in groups, and they just look at it like, well, they're all part of the group, and they never realize what the differences are. That while some in some groups are dangerous, it doesn't mean everyone in that group is dangerous. Because some have a different mentality about their mental health than others. Some can actually figure stuff out about themselves, and once they have a certain realization, they can work with others to help themselves, so that they can actually live a normal life. Others are like a bad fire. So when you realize the difference between a good fire, someone that's actually trying to progress and do well for themselves and actually trying to, make a life for themselves, and that they aren't trying to hurt anybody, versus those that, for whatever reason, are constantly trying to cause harm to others, and that, it's reminiscent of a bad fire, right? And when you can start to differentiate, when you start looking at different ones individually, guess what that does? And that is what scares certain ones. It scares them. And do you know why it is that it scares them? And why it is that if certain ones start to think for themselves, it's almost like a seek and destroy mission. Oh my God, they're starting to think for themselves. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? Because they're losing control. But what's funny about it is, control of what? What exactly is it they're trying to control that they feel so lost when others think for themselves that they're like, oh, we might lose control. What if we lose control? Control of what? What exactly is it you're trying to control, and why are you trying to control it? Now, what's interesting is, I don't know if you ever noticed with parenting, sometimes discipline is good, right? Discipline can actually help children, but sometimes you got to give them freedoms too. Now, you don't want to give too many freedoms, because too many freedoms can lead to anarchy. If you don't give enough freedoms, then they want to rebel, right? And it isn't that a little rebellion is necessarily bad, but, within reason, right? But the idea is, sometimes if you allow your kids the freedom to make some of their own choices, especially if it's stuff that ain't gonna get hurt, most of the time what happens is you might be surprised at how good decisions your kids actually make. I've known kids that were given tons of freedom. What's interesting is, I knew a girl once, years ago, that her parents basically let her do whatever she wanted. She went to a party where they had drugs and alcohol, and she left. She left on her own. She decided she didn't want to be a part of that. Why? Why is it that you decided to leave the party? Well, they had drugs and alcohol. Yeah, but your parents let you do whatever you want. Yeah, but I ain't stupid. Really? So, you actually think that drugs and alcohol is a bad idea? I don't think it's necessarily a bad idea, in certain circumstances, but I actually have goals that I want for myself. I plan on going to college. I plan on, working at certain jobs. And most of those jobs, while sometimes they allow for alcohol, they don't really allow for drugs. And I just figure if I, just live my life without that stuff in the first place, I don't have to worry about it when I'm making a ton of money. That's a good attitude. So is it that your parents are really strict? No, they pretty much let me do whatever I want. I got all the freedoms to go where I want and do what I want, as long as I give them a call every once in a while, and so that they know I'm safe. Wasn't that interesting? Talking to some other kid that was there at the party. Hey, so did your parents know that you're here and stuff like that? Are you kidding? If my parents knew I was here, they'd kill me. Really? Interesting. So, gonna be smoking some more weed and drinking some more beer? Fuck yeah, man! Really? Well, so the kid that had a ton of freedom was allowed to do whatever they wanted, basically, was making some really good decisions, while a bunch of different ones whose parents were apparently very strict and told them what they needed to do all the time, their kids were rebelling and doing drugs and drinking alcohol. Well, that's interesting. Wonder why that is. And then, if you think about prohibition, then it starts to make a little more sense. What happened with prohibition? If you think about it, when they're like, you know what? No more alcohol for anybody. We got Dry County, we're going to make sure nobody drinks alcohol. It's the drink of the devil. And stuff. And then, mobsters. So, yeah, there's a little bit of, some nostalgic storytelling that has a certain romance to it sometimes, that different lines like to watch, but it's almost like they forget, you do realize most of those mobsters are dead, right? But it's something where did those mobsters come from in the first place? Prohibition. Restrictions. Trying to tell others how to live their lives. And that's part of what got me to the point where I'm like, what's interesting about America? America is actually supposed to be about freedoms, tolerance, and equality, and yet there are those that even call themselves the liberal left who for some reason don't actually believe in liberty, equality, tolerance. Why? It's like they have certain agendas. Now, that's why I said when I'm watching the news and I see something where they're talking about, killing a baby in the third trimester when it's already a baby, which even most of those that are pro-choice are like, all right, that's a step too far. I'm going, all right, I want you to think about something, all right? If you got all those different ones that believe that they should have the freedom for their abortions, it's my body and I can do what I want type of attitude, right? And the problem with that is, it's like, yeah, but that's a baby. You already got it to the third trimester. It's like going to get born and then you want to kill it? Talk to some of them. All right? And talk to them about stuff like what happened with the Aztecs, right? And be like, hey, what do you think about the sacrifices that the Aztecs had? Don't talk about it in regards to abortion. Just like have somewhere you can talk to a few of them and go, hey, do you know anything about Aztecs and the sacrifices and stuff? What do you think about that? Especially since some of them are apparently liberals, right? What do you think about, did you ever look at, like, Baal worship and stuff? Remember when the Israelites were putting babies into the fire because there were pagan nations that were doing stuff like that, and it talked about it? And it's in the Bible that it talks about when they turned to Baal worship and they were putting their children into the fire, right? And that they were killing them, burning them alive. What do you think about that? Do you think that those on death row should actually get killed? Do you think that the death penalty is a barbaric act? And most of them with those types of, most of them would be like, that's just terrible. I can't believe that. Oh yeah, that was. However, for some reason, you're going to tell me that after telling me that all that is barbarism and that, you shouldn't have the death penalty and stuff, but you want to kill a baby. Is that what you're saying? I would like you to explain yourself. Why it is that you feel you have control of your body, that you want to carry a child all the way to where it's about to get born and then you want to kill a baby. Go ahead. I want to hear it. Explain to me how you don't sound like a complete hypocrite. I want you to make me believe that you aren't a fool and a hypocrite because you want to kill a baby, but you think the death penalty is wrong for those in death row, some of whom were convicted of rape and murder and molestation. But for some reason, you're totally cool with killing a baby. Why it is that you think when the Aztecs committed those sacrifices and the Baal worship and stuff where they were burning children alive, you think that is barbarism and you think that is pagan atrocities, but for some reason, you're totally cool with killing your own baby. I want you to explain that. And please, make sure that I don't think you're a hypocrite. I want you to explain it. See, when you start actually thinking about some of that, like I said, I told you I like having a sense of humor, but some of it, you got to realize that you can't always have just a sense of humor about stuff. Now, it's good to joke and laugh, right? And some of it's a little bit funny if you think about it, right? You might even laugh at some of that because of the fact that even though it's serious, you might go like, "Holy crap, they're a bunch of freaking hypocrites! What a bunch of dumbasses!" Like no one would have noticed. But that's the problem. It seems like there's tons of different ones that don't. Like it just go over their head, like, I don't know what you're talking about. Well, it's the woman's right. What about the baby's rights? Just wondering. So it's like when you start thinking about it, there's a certain amount of stuff where there can be a certain sense of humor. There's also why sometimes you might call it humorous, right? Because when you realize what is humorous. Look it up. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, look it up. So it's kind of something where when you start realizing some of the realities, right? Once you finally get to a place where you start thinking for yourself, when you have your own ideas, there's going to be different ones that might want to target you, but remember, the reason they want to target you is because they have Frankenstein's monster syndrome, and because they have, what is it? Stupidity and arrogance and hypocrisy. That's what they have. They have hatred. They're haters. They have the Prince Humperdinck syndrome. So when you start realizing the reality of it, I'm just trying to help you to actually think. Because when you start to think, and when someone else starts to think, and everyone actually, uses their brains, you're one step closer to proving you're a human. And if you realize what it is, if you're a human versus just an animal, versus some programmed machine, and when you realize why certain ones are scared of anyone that can actually think for themselves and reason for themselves and make their own decisions, guess what you might actually realize? Guess what you might finally figure out?